Welcome to the Access Sport podcast, your best chance to learn more about our students, our teams and our programmes.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the Access Sport podcast. Myself, Gary Judge, Director at Access Sports, joined as always by my colleague Jordan Neald, who is our careers lead. And I've got to thank Jordan this week for getting us a top guest on. We've tried to mix it up every week, as we've said. And again, this week's no different. We've got FC Halifax player Sam Minihan. How you doing, Sam?
Yeah, very well, thanks yourself.
Yeah, no, thanks for joining us, mate. I'll allow Jordan to take you through the structure of the episode, and again, as your former colleague or former teammate, briefly, I'll let Jordan lead from there. So thanks again, mate, and off we go.
Pleasure, mate.
Yeah, it's a bit of an interview style with one of my mates here, so this is a little bit different. But yeah, mate, obviously now you're at Halifax Town. You've had quite the journey in football. I thought it would a good link to the learners at Access, because some of the guys on the programme are obviously got ambitions to continue playing at a high standard. So before we get into it, just give us a little breakdown of your journey in footy.
Yeah, so started at Rochdale when I was 6 and then made my way through all the age groups, all the way to the first team. So obviously in itself quite a rare achievement going through all the age groups there. And then when I was 18, which would be a first year pro age, that was the first sort of rejection I'd felt in terms of I was released there. And that was the point where I decided to take a different sort of direction in life and went to obviously Loughborough, where I met you, Jordy, and played for the university team there for a good few years. And off the back of that, signed for Worcester City in non-league, which was sort of my way back into ultimately playing professional football again at Stockport County, where I was there for 6 seasons, and then currently obviously playing for Halifax Town, like you just mentioned. So I guess you could say it's a different career path to the one that most take, but yeah, it's been an interesting journey so far.
You say it's different, and obviously it is, but what have you learned sort of on a broad level in terms of falling out the game? Because especially the people that might be listening to this might have faced rejection at sort of YTS level, 16, and then I know at that age you can sometimes think there's no way back for me here. I'm not going to get back into football. But what have you taken from falling out the game and then getting back in?
For me, lad, it's more. I think a lot of people are scared by the idea of coming out of football. They almost think that taking a different career path is almost like you shutting yourself off from getting back into the professional game. And for me, it wasn't the case. I found it quite refreshing to have been a professional footballer, which obviously I'd worked all my life for, and then to make that tough decision when I obviously felt rejection that time when Rochdale released me, and that new sort of like adventure and experience for me, obviously going to college and then university at Loughborough, it sort of allowed me to take a step back from it all, see a different way of life, switch off from football because it is an intense environment, and find my love for the sport again, which then, looking back now, gave me that energy and that newfound sort of like motivation to then go back into the pro game. So for me, I think a lot of people, like you say, who were pushing to be a footballer, think that if they then go and start a new career or go to college or go to university, they're basically saying, that's me done, like I am not going to become a professional footballer. But like you've seen with me, I was pro, came out the game completely. Like, we were playing at the worst level of Midlands Alliance football, getting kit lumps out of, and that was genuinely one of the lowest levels of semi-pro football. But I did it for a reason and I did it for a purpose. And that, like I say, now has given me that drive to have the freedom to go and be a professional footballer again. And that's sort of the take home I'd like to give to anyone listening, that just because you dip out of football doesn't mean that you're necessarily giving up on that goal. It's just opening yourself up to a new horizon, I guess.
Sam, sorry, just a couple of words you used then, like drive and freedom. Like they're probably not words that people would expect to hear from someone who's as you said, had that type of setback. Do you think it took the pressure off a little bit, so to speak? Taking that, what would be perceived to be a step back. Did you? What was the feeling for you? Once you'd settled in at college and at uni, and and you were back to being, you know, like a normal person? Because, you know, professional footballers, whether it's the case or not, and we know it isn't, are sometimes seen to not be normal people. You know, they've got a very special lifestyle, I guess a bit of a privileged lifestyle. What was that feeling like, taking that step back, and how did you find it was from a mentality point of view?
I think you're spot on. I think taking a step back from it all and just seeing a new way of life opens you up to that there is another world out there. And I think when you're a footballer, especially, it's a very intense environment. You become very tunnel vision because every day you're sort of sacrificing. You're focused on training. Everything works around that. You don't get many days off. You don't get time with family, with friends, to go out, to learn, to experience like other things that life can throw at you. And I think, like, you hit the nail on the head there. That's the why I use the word freedom, because I felt the weight come off me completely. And don't get me wrong, the first year I was at college, it was a tough year. It was all new to me. I was quite anxious going into lectures and stuff because I was used to running around and playing football all of my life. And then all of a sudden I'm sat in a classroom and it's like, okay, this has become real. But as time went on, I found that the weight was completely lifted. I could enjoy going out with mates. I could enjoy learning, which I never thought I'd fully enjoy. Obviously, it had to be something that I was interested in. But yeah, again, like, I think that's why, because I came out of that environment and that intense environment, and that to me was really a moment that I could recharge and see other elements that life could throw at you, and then go back into the game with that refreshed mentality.
The interesting thing for me, and obviously I've lived it, you know, just in the same way as you, without continuing, you know, into football. But the thing for me is the higher education side of it, where, you know, you go from YTS football to higher education. And I think people will be listening to this who are debating going to university, but like you rightly said, might think, you know, if I go there, I've not really got a chance to then go back into the program. But what did you learn? I know you've touched on what you learned in terms of freedom and stuff. What did you learn dropping down to play university level football? Like, was the part of it that shocked you, part of it that improved you? Or, you know, how did you find that whole experience?
I think it sort of rounded me as a person more. Obviously, you're playing at a lower level, so it was a lot more of a mature level. I've never really played men's football before, so to be in that environment where you're playing in men's football, you have to grow up pretty quickly. But not only that, we played in the college and the university leagues, which you're playing with your mates. Like, we had some incredible times, Jordy, where you're traveling around. You know, you're playing on some incredible pitches. You forget the facilities a lot better than a lot of pro clubs. So there's so many elements to it. Obviously, the gym, the training facilities, the social aspect to it all. I just think it made me a lot more rounded person. And like I say, at the time, I wasn't used to that sort of lifestyle because I'd become so driven by this one goal that I'd switched myself off from everything else, even my personality. And then going to university or to college, like you say, or higher education, that allowed me to be around like-minded people that, you know, had different aspirations, but still had a drive and a desire to learn and a desire to socialize. And that's really what higher education can bring. And that's what I benefited from massively.
Yeah, I think I echo them points. I think a lot of what, you know, if you've got an ambition to be a footballer or to play at any sort of level, I think the biggest thing that higher education can bring to you is, so it's probably off the pitch more than on it. Don't get me wrong, like Loughborough's facilities and, you know, the standard we trained at. I mean, our training sessions at Loughborough, I know there's many others now across the country who've got a similar thing, but, you know, the standard of some of them sessions were as good as any, you know, sort of lower league club. There was some brilliant players, but I think it's as a person, and I think if you've got ambition to go and then compete at high level sports again, you have to have certain things in your personality to be able to survive, you know, for one, in dressing rooms, for two, for the pressure that comes with playing. And I think it's so important that, you know, you do round yourself off as an individual. But now I'm going to sort of like give you a bit of praise, and I just want your take on this. When we began playing together, we had a lot of people from, you know, different sort of backgrounds, but the one thing that stood out about you in particular was your ability was second to none. You were a brilliant player, but it was your attitude to be in training to playing games. Like I've seen you play stupidly injured, which, you know, was a bit stupid, but I've seen you do it. And sort of you trained the way you played. And I think you had like an infectious attitude. And a lot of what we do and the message we push over to people is, you know, it's not always about ability in any sort of walk of life, whether you're an accountant or you're playing in sport. It's the tangible stuff like attitude that'll get you where you need to be. Was that a conscious thing from you to have a good attitude, to be coachable, to be teachable? Or was that just something that, you know, is ingrained in you?
Probably a bit of both, to be fair, mate. Obviously, you know, appreciate those kind words, lad. Obviously, I'll return them as well, because very good player technically, you know, miles better than I was, and that probably speaks for a lot of players. But for me, like you say, I think it was ingrained into me, obviously, with my upbringing. But for me, I just know that from experience of being around the professional game and what it takes to get there, and like you'll hear multiple people from even like the elite level, you can have all the technical ability, of course, but for me, the main sort of factors of being successful and doing well in life are the characteristics that you just mentioned. And that for me, I was very conscious of that, and I had to use that to my strengths, because I realised that would get me the upper hand and ultimately get me back to where I wanted to get to. So, like you know, there's a lot of things that could lead you astray at university, but for me, it was more staying disciplined. You know, staying in on the nights out when I needed to, revising for the exam if I had one coming up. And that was tough, but I just knew that in the long term that would be better for me. And I remember thinking in my last year at university, there's times in life where you just have to get your head down and graft. And I was traveling to Worcester and back, which was 2-3 hour round trip. I was obviously going out. I was training with Loughborough as well, going to the gym, going to lectures, going to seminars. I was non-stop every day for a year, but I remember thinking I just have to get my head down and show this work ethic and determination that's going to set me apart. And that's why I did it, lad, really, just because I wanted to get back to the pro game, and I had to do something different to everyone else.
Do you know what? Sorry, Jordan. I think that's a great point, Sam. And I think what we've got already, and we're only about 5 episodes in here. Every person we've spoke to, and every person we spoke to has been successful in their own way. Very different pathways, but they all talk about the importance of those initial years, about how tough it was. They can remember it, but how much of a big part of their development it was. And Jordan mentioned before at the start, or at the start of his question, whether you're an accountant or a footballer, I think whatever your ambitions are, I think you do need to go through that, you know, that period of really digging in, don't you? And you know, and taking them necessary steps.
I think it just adds to your motivation. Obviously, you know, when you have that moment of rejection or you have that first obstacle, it's like, right, this is what it's going to this is going to test my personality. This is going to test how far I'm going to go. And at that point, when I felt that at Rochdale, I could have probably dragged out a career in non-league and maybe made it pro, maybe hung around the semi-pro game. But I wanted more than that, and I realised to take 2 steps forward, I had to take 1 back first. And to a lot of people, that sounds a bit crazy and doesn't seem to make sense. Doesn't seem like logistically it makes sense, but it genuinely does. I think you've got to rebuild and explore other avenues, and I think that's quite a powerful thing to do. Just to, even with Geordie, like, you know, if you'd have said to you back in the day, when you graduated, that you're going to end up with your podcast and all that sort of stuff, not that you would have said no, but other doors and other pathways open up, and you've got to explore them and walk through these doors and see what leads off the back of it. And I think that's what we've both done in our own different ways, and that anyone can do. You know, that relates to everybody. So it's worked for me, and I know that it'd work for people listening to this as well.
Mate, the very good points, because I get really conscious that, you know, young people, because I've walked in the shoes myself, I think at, you know, 16, 17, 18, you can sometimes think like very short term, like in terms of, I can't go and do sort of X because it's going to distract me from, you know, doing this. But I think, as Gary rightly said, everyone who's come on and everyone who's building a successful career in whatever that may be, they always talk, as he said, about rounding yourself as a person And I sometimes think that rejection is, we don't want to feel it, but I feel like it's a necessary evil towards, building yourself a really successful career. But I think one thing that we need to sort of especially push on younger people is that it's okay to fail. And that's something I want to talk about with you, because I'm sure when you got released from Rochdale, you felt like you failed. But now, as you stand as someone who's played, I don't know how many sort of games you've played as a sort of at a very high level now, but I know it's a lot. How did that failure sort of prepare you for them good moments? Because I've seen moments where you're getting ovations by sort of, the Stockport County crowd. I know you've won promotions, you've come through long seasons. How did sort of failure sort of prepare you for them brilliant moments?
I think it teaches you to be level-headed. At the time when I felt that rejection, I think I allowed it to, not for long, but I allowed it to sort of consume me. And it's the first time that you felt it. And I think a lot of people can probably relate to that. But then I felt like there was a switch when I decided to go to higher education. And that switch was me taking control of my situation, where I'd felt that rejection. I'd felt that sort of like all of the emotions that came with that. But then I flipped it and I did something with it. And that's me taking control. And I think when you take control of your situation, you feel a lot of comfort straight away. And then it did teach me to be level-headed. So in the moments where we'd lose a game of football, because football's so up and down, but in those moments of rejection at the start, looking back now, when I was playing games or when I was in training, I had a bad session or had a bad day in general, or whatever it was on that given day, just teaching me to be level-headed, because obviously, there's a lot of highs and there's a lot of lows, and luckily I've had more highs. But I think those early moments of rejection do teach you to be level-headed. And just going back to your previous point as well, Jordy, I think it's important to be proactive instead of reactive. That's something I was taught from an early age. And I think what I mean by that is at the time when, I still speak to footballers now that say, I wish I would have done it the way you've done it. Because a lot of footballers now have, like I said, pushed for a career in football, realising they're coming towards the back end of the career, towards retirement, and they're thinking, right, what am I doing next? And that panics them, you can see that. And I think a lot of them have sort of, when I've spoke to them about it, have said, listen, I like the way that you were proactive with it. You had that sort of long-term goal, but you realised the steps that you had to take to get there. And again, I think it goes back to being proactive, and that's the best advice I can give, really, just to be proactive when you feel that rejection, and to take control of your situation.
Yeah. Go on, sorry.
Oh, go on, Gary, you go in. Absolutely.
I was going to say, once again, it sounds like we're just agreeing with everything you're saying, but it's so relatable to other walks of life, and again, similar to different pathways. One thing that, just to share a recent experience I had, I've been receiving some coaching, not coaching as football coaching, just coaching around dealing with stuff as a manager. And one of the questions I got asked, because I had to do a personality quiz, it was you don't seem to worry about things. Why is it? Well, your answers suggest you don't worry about things. And I just said, my response was, I try and live by controlling the controllables. And if there's something outside of my control that I literally can't do anything about, there's just no point worrying about it. All you can do is, as you said, try and be proactive. Look at another avenue. Look at something you can do to try and limit the damage, so to speak, because that's normally what people worry about, or what's going to happen, what's the worst thing that can happen. All you can do, in my opinion, whether it's rejection or whether it's something you think might be a rejection or a concern, is just control the controllables. And what you said there about taking back that control, it just does so much, doesn't it, to relieve any anxiety or stress that you've got.
And I wasn't the best at that, if I'm being honest. At the time, it was difficult, and you do tend to overthink and look back and feel a bit sorry for yourself, because you had this idea of being a professional footballer and it going in that direction. But ultimately, it's based on opinions, and I had to get my head around the fact that someone's opinion doesn't define who I am. And again, that goes back to controlling controllables, because I can't control their opinion of me, but what I can control is what I then do next. And that was for me, like I say, taking that pathway, and then I did start to focus on what I could control. So like I say, you know, my personal health and my personal learning and growing in that way. And I think that again comes with maturity as well. But I think you're spot on. Like, if you can control the controllables, I don't think you'll fall short necessarily.
Sam, before we just touch on, like, you know, what you're doing now and sort of the good times you've had lately, do you think that the pathway from sort of education into professional football is not celebrated enough? Because I think, you know, we hear all the time now about, you know, professional athletes getting to 38, 39, and as you touched on before, they might have an issue with, they don't know what to do next in the career. They didn't quite earn the money that they thought they needed to do. They might then suffer with, you know, drink and gambling, whatever it may be. But do you think that idea of putting something together, what you can fall back on, is not celebrated enough or not promoted enough?
100%. 100%. From my experiences in football, from being around professional sports, like yourself, I genuinely don't think it is. And why, I'm not too sure. The first thing that springs to my mind is that if sports sometimes are seen to be pushing education, it might then be seen that they're not steering their sports people into becoming professional sports people, if that makes sense. So in a footballing environment, if people aren't showing footballers that there are options out there, and let's face it, they do, but are they really pushing it enough to make them want to do it? I'm not saying that there aren't things in place and schemes in place to say, you know, if it doesn't work out, then you could take this route or this route or this route. But, you know, is it being pushed enough? Is it being celebrated enough? Probably not, mate, because at the end of the day, they want to produce professional sports people that are going to benefit their club or their sport, which I understand to a degree, but there's got to be a balance and there's got to be options, because as we're seeing, there's a lot of people coming out of, you know, professional sports or academies, whatever it is, and they fall into a lot of issues. And I just feel like, again, it goes back to preparing. And I think sport and you know, governing bodies in general could do a lot more to really push it, you know, because there are things out there, as you've seen with ourselves and what you've going on, Gary. There's a lot of great things going on and great initiatives, but let's push them more and let's make people actively want to do it more.
I think the reason I ask is because sometimes I feel like someone could be outside of professional football, so to speak, and see that as a negative. Do you know what I mean? Whereas I think the mentality shift should be, you've actually got a unique opportunity. You've got an opportunity to not only get back into the game, because there's countless sort of people who've done it who you can follow, but you've also got this opportunity to build a second pathway for yourself. Like, I just feel like sometimes people in that position might think they're at a disadvantage, whereas probably argue that they're at an advantage, especially in the modern game. And
it might make you realise that, do you know what, I actually would prefer to do this, because you're taught to want to be a footballer. As we know, it's something that most, you know, men and girls now especially want to strive to be. And I think it's one of those where, you know what, if you actually explore a different way of life, you might open yourself up to something you had no idea that you liked, but you're never going to know unless you explore it. And I think that's something that, you know, benefits off that being pushed and that being shown, because I don't think there is enough at the minute that is done on that.
I think, you know, mate, I'm sort of proof of that. Like, the skills I picked up at university, especially, so my writing career started with me writing my own thoughts down because I needed to make clarity of them. I developed that eventually into a career. And I think you hit the nail on the head then. So many people be like, football, or sport. Whereas sometimes, you know, you fall into these things that will be like, you know, as we touched on earlier, you know, I've really got a thing for numbers. I might want to go and be an accountant. And I think we need to soften the sort of perception around that to go, that's actually a positive thing. Like, that's a positive way of going about your life. It doesn't mean that you have to cut football off or you have to cut sport off. It just means that you can become more than that. It doesn't have to define exactly, you know, who you are as a person.
Do you know what?
Go on, sorry, go on.
I was going to say, do you know what I think will help? And it's I'm not just bringing it in because we're doing a podcast here. You look at the likes of Michael Antonio and Callum Wilson doing their own podcast. You've got a few of them now, haven't you? We're getting into it, and they're talking about, and they're opening up and talking about, you know, the difficulties they're having at the very, very top level, but the reasons why maybe they're trying to get involved in media now and you know, opening up on the fact they enjoy it. And, you know, I think I listened to an episode the other week where Callum Wilson was saying, you know what, sometimes I don't want to go training. I don't want to get up in the morning and go training. But, I can't wait to do this podcast every week and I'm enjoying it. I enjoy talking about things. And I think it needs that, doesn't it, to almost remove that stigma, because it's not seen as the done thing, is it? It's not glamorous. So maybe to the young people to go, well, I'm going to actually go and do a night course whilst I'm also playing or whatever it may be.
And I think to follow on from that as well, you actually get more out of a person in the sporting environment than or in the performances. Like the names you just touched on, look at them, look at the way they're playing at the minute. Obviously, he's just got a call up to the World Cup squad, and it's like I think people forget and people look at it and go, if they're doing these media, this podcast, or they're working for this charity or whatever it is that it might be, that they don't care about football anymore, or it's going to harm the football, or you know, their energy isn't going into it. The reality is completely different. If they're taking themselves out of and learning new skills and enjoying that, because it is enjoyable, then that is going to benefit what they do on a training field and ultimately when they're playing. And that's something that, again, going back to what you were saying, Joy, I think people's interpretations of what that means are clouded at the minute. And I think, you know, speaking from my experiences and like you just touched on with the names there, that they go hand in hand.
It's mental health and happiness, isn't it? You know, listen, I think to be fair, there's been a lot of publicity, positive publicity around mental health and people opening up. But again, it's just an extension of that, isn't it? You know, you being comfortable with your next steps after football and you being comfortable that actually I've got something else outside of football. It takes that, you know, that thought or that bit of anxiety in the back of your mind away, doesn't it, potentially?
100%, mate. 100%.
No, sort of talking on not after sport, but your life now. You've enjoyed it. I don't know. I haven't really spoke to you about this, but you've enjoyed a couple of like what I'd call crazy years. You've had crazy success. You've become a Stockport County legend, and now you've got a new adventure. So just speak to us about the last couple of years and like the things you've achieved, what you've learned, and obviously now your new adventure.
Yeah, you probably hit the nail on the head there. Like, that's been a bit crazy. And obviously we've got that in us, but last 3 years, obviously I signed with Stockport just over 6 years ago, and then from there on in, it was just sort of like a success story, really. There was constant improvement in our league positioning, and then off the field that led to a takeover, which led to us going full time, and then we had 2 promotions. Which ultimately got the club back into the Football League. And then, you know, now the club's just on a completely different level. They've just, you know, achieved a Cat 3 status academy. The charities had a lot more funding. And I'm now working at the academy with Stockport County still. Off the back of that, you know, I'm doing my B license in the minute coaching. Again, going back to that proactive mindset of, you know, preparing for what's going to happen after football, and then currently playing for Halifax Town, enjoying my football there as well. Another project that, you know, it's a big club, a well supported club that have ambitions of getting back into the Football League. So it's just been one of those. It's gone very quickly. Obviously, it doesn't feel like yesterday that we were playing together at university. But you know, it goes quickly, and it's been very successful and very enjoyable. But at the same time, you know, it all goes back to those things that we spoke about in terms of work ethic, resilience, honesty. These are all massive things that play a part in the success and the enjoyment. And yeah, it's been very very enjoyable, and I've achieved a lot, but there's still a lot more to do. And again, that all goes back to what we've touched on.
Just one more thing from you, because you know, obviously looking through your career and listening to what you've just said. What's it like now making that move? Is it 20? Are you 29, 30 now? 29? Is it
28? I look older, lads, but I'm 28. I lost that early doors, mate.
No,
My
question was around what where do you see yourself, or what stage do you consider yourself to be at your career now? I mean, I gather from the way that you were at uni, you've overcome some injuries, but you've got yourself fit again. You know, one question is, you know, how long do you see your career going on till? And the second one is, what's it like being the more senior pro at a team and coming in and maybe being that person who's there to influence some of the younger players?
So firstly, I'd like to play for as long as possible. And, you know, I really value sort of like fitness and health and all that sort of stuff. So I'm constantly working on that to play for as long as possible, because that is my passion ultimately. But the truth is, with doing all this in the background, I would feel comfortable if I knew it was the right time to pull out and to try to, you know, something else. So that's the beauty of it. And then, sorry, what was the next point that you mentioned then?
Is obviously, well, I assume now that you're one of the more senior pros in the sport.
Yeah.
What's that like being in that position as opposed to maybe coming through and having to prove everything? And you know, how do you take on that responsibility?
I think it's a strange one, because the transition sort of happens, and before you know it, you are one of the more experienced players in the dressing room. And at Halifax, we're quite a young team, so I guess players are sort of looking at me for, I don't know, experiences, passing on, you know, life lessons, and I guess that comes down to being open-minded again, because you know, there's still more experienced players than me in the change room. There's still the staff members there, and I guess it doesn't really matter what age you are. You're still learning from people, and you can take stuff from younger people as well. You know, I'm always learning. I'm a great believer that you can take something from anyone that you meet. So, you know, whoever that might be, you can take a life lesson away from whoever you meet. So I'm very conscious of that every time, you know, that I'm in there. But of course, you know, there's times where we lose a game or we go on a bad run, and it would be easy to you know, to allow emotion to take over or whatever it might be. But I guess, you know, as an experienced player, it's doing it in the right way, because there's different ways of doing it, but you still got to have that emotional intelligence that you are new to the club and that you are new to the surroundings, and there's ways that you've got to do it. But I'd like to think I lead more in terms of how I act and what I'm doing day to day. I think words are words, aren't they, at the end of the day? But like Jordy said, I'd like to think that I'm the type that turns up, trains, gives it my all, keeps my discipline more often than not, and just lead by example, really, mate. That's how I like to pass on my experiences and lead in that way. But there's loads of different ways to do it.
Mate, it's been a brilliant chat. Proper enjoyed it. But what I wanted to get for you just before we sign off is, if someone is listening to this who might be, I don't know, might be playing semi-pro, might be thinking about university, might be thinking about, what advice would you give to them if they do still have an ambition to break into the pro game?
I think ultimately, and it's a recurring theme in all of this, is just to be open-minded to everything, and to understand that you exploring different avenues and different pathways should be celebrated and should be encouraged, because it can only be beneficial in my eyes, because you become a more rounded person. It relaxes you. It takes the weight off your shoulders. It makes you realise that you have a skill set that you didn't even realise you had. And ultimately, it probably will help you achieve your end goal, if that's genuinely what you want to do. So there's so many advantages to these higher education programs, and to studying and to learning and to going through that process, and just to really throw yourself into it and get lost in it, because there's a reason why everyone talks about the mindset that you've got to have to do well, and just really tap into that, because, you know, like you said, you've done quite a few of these chats now, and there's a lot of themes that you can pick from it, and there's a reason why that's the case. So just dip into those as much as you can, and just be open-minded.
Top man, appreciate your time, mate. I've loved it.
No, thanks a lot, Sam. Cheers, mate, and best of luck for the rest of the season as well.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.